Hey, church, this is Clark taking us through our Wednesday word, finishing up studying First Peter today. So we're going to read First Peter chapter 5, verses 1 through 11. So pause, read First Peter chapter 5, 1 through 11. All right. So whenever I read this chapter or have read this chapter in the past, for me, it always feels like a bunch of random sayings, like verses 1 through 4 are all about pastors, shepherds taking care of their people. Then all of a sudden you get verses 5 through 6, which are talking about being humble and having humility. And then you get verse 7, which people just, it gets quoted all the time, cast all your anxiety on him. And then you get random chat, verse 8, about all of a sudden now look out for Satan because he's trying to get you. And then you get verses 10 through 11 all about suffering. And most of the time, whenever I've heard those verses, it's kind of been like out of context, where it's just like, okay, here's these 2 verses at a time, trying to teach you about something. But even though it seems random, when you read it all together, I think what we're supposed to see Peter pointing out here is that right in the middle is like the glue that glues the whole passage together. Verses 5 through 6 there, when he says, and all of you must clothe yourselves with humility in your dealings with one another, for God opposes the proud but gives grace to the humble. Humble yourselves therefore under the mighty hand of God, so that he may exalt you in due time. This whole passage is about humility, and really the main principle I want us to get out of this is that life in Christ, being a follower of Jesus, is all about humility. Now, when I say the word humility, or when we think of the word humility, a lot of the times we think of, okay, I got to think that I'm not a very good person. I got to like make sure that I'm not thinking I'm very good, think less of myself. I'm like, I'm a terrible person, blah, blah, blah. And I don't think that that's what humility actually is. I don't think it's not thinking less of yourself. It's thinking about yourself less. So take, for example, Jesus, right? Jesus was extremely confident, knew who he was, claimed to be the Son of God. Definitely, you wouldn't say, well, he thought he was a terrible person or anything like that. Yet we know he was humble. So what is humility? Jesus was constantly thinking about the Father, thinking about God, what the Father was asking him to do, and he was constantly thinking of others, right? And I think that that is what humility is. It's thinking of yourself less, thinking about God and others more. So how do we apply this to our lives? How does Peter apply this to our lives? Now, this is coming from someone who's not very good at humility, right? It's kind of like last week, not very good at suffering. So I'm just trying to tell you what I think the text says. I'm not a very good example of this, but first of all, in our lives together, verses 1 through 4, part of verse 5, so I guess first 5.5 verses there. In our lives together, it's about mutual submission. So leaders, it talks about taking care of the flock, being not lording it over those in your charge, being good examples, but then also the people serving and submitting to the leaders. So it's this mutual submission. They're both taking care of each other. And Peter's already talked about that with husbands and wives, mutual submission, workers, bosses, mutual. That's the Christian life, is everyone is serving one another, right? We're not trying to be in charge of someone else. I'm not trying to like tell you what to do. It's everything. Leadership is serving. Everything is about serving one another. Jesus is an example of this in John, when he washes his disciples' feet, even though he's their master and their teacher and the Messiah. He washes their feet. He even says, whoever wants to lead must serve. And that he himself came to serve, not to be served. So serving one another is humility. And then when Peter gets to the part about cast your anxieties on him, keep alert, the devil is trying to roar and devour you. This is something, the same thing James says in another part of the Bible, where he says this, he uses the same verse, where he talks about God opposes the proud but gives grace to the humble. In our life with God, James and Peter are both saying we have to be humble before God, which means submitting ourselves to God. So we submit to one another, we serve one another, and we submit to God, and that kills pride, which is where that link with Satan comes in First Peter and in James. So what do? We give God our anxieties. We don't try to take it all ourselves and try to do everything on our own. Think about the Psalms and how they are constantly crying out to God, giving their anxieties, giving their problems over to Him. That is how we humbly submit to God, by giving Him our problems, not trying to do it all on our own, and then continuing to do good, discipline yourself, keep alert, be sober minded. Some of them say this just means what Peter's been saying the whole time. Even though you're suffering, even though you might be going through some bad times, don't use that as an excuse to do wrong. Continue to do good. So this whole passage, humility, serve one another, serve God, give your cares to Him, um, and 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 that's what life as a Christian is about. I think that's what I got for you this week. Love you all. Praying for you all.